All right. Hello and welcome to the Monday, July 27th edition of the Cluster API Provider AWS Office Hours, a subproject of both SIG Cluster Lifecycle and Cluster API. Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted up to YouTube afterwards. And the meeting abides by the Kubernetes Community Code of Conduct. So in general, please be excellent to one another. If you are attending live, please go ahead and add your name to the attending list in the agenda. And if there's anything you want to bring up, please go ahead and add it to the group topics section of the agenda as well. To start off with, I wanted to give a couple of PSAs. The first one, there has been a version 0.5.5-RC.0 release. It included a few features which are listed in the doc, as well as some bug fixes that were identified from the previous alpha release. I believe we will be working towards the official 0.5.5 release here shortly. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, Andy, if there are any blockers for that.
I was considering waiting for Nadir to get back from PTO to finish out the Bastion PR. There's an issue where we hard code T2 micro, and that's not available in all availability zones, especially US West 2D, I think. So if you end up randomly getting your Bastion created or placed into that specific AZ, then it will fail. And Nadir has a pull request open to try and fix it. It changes the logic to go to some of the newer T3 or T3A types and fall back if needed. Somebody also had a suggestion to, like, rather than hard coding specific instance types, hard coding minimum specs, and then describing the available instance types and finding the cheapest one that matched the minimum specs. But that conversation was after Nadir went on vacation. So I think we could cut it now, assuming we're happy with what's in there. We could wait for Nadir to come back and finish the pull request. Either would be fine with me, I think.
All right. I think waiting on Nadir is probably fine unless anybody has a desire for it to go out sooner. We can continue that discussion asynchronously. And the other PSA I wanted to bring up was around the Kubernetes Kates.io, GCR.io vanity domain. For images, the domain flip has been completed. So all of the images that we've been producing and promoting to us.gcr.io/gatesartifactsprod are now available using the alias as well. So kates.gcr.io/image name. So we will likely update to use that for the 0.5.5 release and for future uses. But all of the images should be available both through the old URLs that we're using as well as the new vanity domain. And that brings us to the group topics. Andrew, EKS support updates.
Yeah, so for the past couple of weeks, we've been working pretty much all day, every day on adding EKS support into Kappa. A couple of updates. I spoke to Richard this morning. He's unable to make this call, but he said he expects the control plane PR to be unwhipped this week. He's working on some tag plumbing right now, and he says if it's not working very shortly, he's just going to open it up as a follow-up PR. So looking forward to that. There are a couple of PRs that are like open but kind of useless without the control plane stuff. For one, the EKS bootstrap provider has a PR that is open. It's a bootstrap provider, so there's a lot to look at in there. But we finished that last week. And it's tested and working with some hacks, hacks due to lack of control plane. But that needs some eyes on it, for one, so that would be great. I expect to trade PR reviews with the Weaveworks folks once the control plane stuff gets open. But it would be great to get some other eyes on them, just from outside the perspective of like working intimately with EKS, just looking at the standards, how we implemented a bootstrap provider versus how KubeADM works. Just would love some feedback on those kinds of things. So that is open. There is also a PR open for automatically detecting the appropriate official EKS AMI given your region and configuration. That PR doesn't necessarily make any sense to go in until there's a control plane, because part of the detection logic is this an EKS cluster? If so, maybe prefer the EKS official AMI over the default lookup Ubuntu AMI. And so that's open. I don't really know what will change in that PR, depending on the control plane stuff. I don't think very much. So those two are basically open, ready to go, can be reviewed, but I'll probably slap a hold on them just because they don't do anything in the current code base. So it's really up to how the logistics are preferred. The last thing is, by the end of this week, we expect to have the AWS machine pool implementation for unmanaged node groups complete. So this is using auto-scaling groups behind the scenes. The implementation follows Azure Machine Pool relatively closely, with some modifications for things that are specific to the auto-scaling APIs. There's a lot involved in that. We're pulling in new APIs, auto-scaling, and we're doing some new things in EC2 with launch templates. So there's a lot of moving parts in that, but we do have it mostly working. We just need to plumb some more fields. So we expect that PR to be open as well. I think I can stop talking now. And so if there are questions or feedback, please go ahead.
Did I write down the part about machine pools correctly?
AWS machine pool using ASGs ready in the near. Yep, that's basically it. So from our perspective, for the New Relic use case, we're going to have a couple of these providers. The first is the unmanaged, like ASG machine pool provider. At some point in maybe the medium term, we also expect to do the managed node group provider. And on top of that, we are thinking about spot instances as well. And that may present a third provider. ASGs have some plumbing for this. There are some differences that we want to account for, but that's just something we're thinking about as well. But we've started with what we think is the most straightforward, which is auto-scaling group launch template. By straightforward, I mean the one that we have experience using, really, but yeah.
With the auto-scaling groups, is that flipping where the cluster autoscaler should point? Like if I want those to autoscale, I should point the cluster autoscaler to make it an AWS endpoint instead of the cluster API endpoint for scaling?
That's a great question. And in fact, the answer is currently unknown. If we are following the way cluster API works, like to a T by design, proposed from the beginning, we would actually implement a machine pool integration for cluster API in the autoscaler. And the reason for that is the data flows in that direction for the most part in cluster API. But we discussed a couple weeks back, the cluster autoscaler for autoscaling groups is actually quite mature. And there's a lot of implementation that needs to be done to match that level of maturity with machine pools, especially because machine pool is a generic and it doesn't actually know about the implementation details of every underlying provider. So there's a pretty solid argument for allowing the machine pool to actually take its replicas data from the other direction if that makes sense. So telling cluster autoscaler to look at the autoscaling groups directly and telling cluster API, hey, like you're going to see some changes to the replica count, and that's because we treat AWS as the source of truth and not the machine pool. So it's something that we're still thinking about.
And how does that work with the managed node groups? Are the actual like EKS managed nodes, right? Like,
yeah,
customer doesn't interact with them at all. Those are also a controlled ASG, but controlled, OS completely as far as a customer is concerned. How does that interact with what Cluster API is doing to the machines and provisioning them and understanding what it is? I mean, that again is source of truth is AWS. So is that same idea?
My expectation for the managed group is really that it will just create one, and any options that you can specify through like the AWS API for configuring them can be plumbed that way. But other than that, I expect this controller to just say, does it exist? Does its configuration match what I've passed through? And that's basically it. I mean, machine level information kind of goes away big time in this configuration, and we're okay with that. For us, the value in having that object at all is just the way that our dev teams consume Cluster API is by interacting with these objects, and that's their lens into the underlying infrastructure in the cluster. So while the controller wouldn't actually do very much, like it might not scale it, it might not handle targeting and terminating individual machines. It just needs to know that it exists and that the configuration of it is correct.
I'm also assuming that all of the managed node groups are that way, but at least with the ASG, the machine pools, those are all the same instance type, right? You're not doing mixed, because I know ASG can have spots or non-spots and also different sizes and types of instances. This is assuming that an ASG is just one type, right?
Now, yes, we have a pretty strong need for mixed instance type support, and for a while that will come in the form of just having multiple ASGs. But we do want that feature to work. We have no idea how, but we do want that to work, and we want autoscaling for that to work, and we want a lot of things that are probably very hard to do. But our cluster API environment is incredibly large. And like anything we can do to have one less machine deployment, one less machine pool, like is actually huge because of the number of clusters that we support that are deployed this way. So like we really want that capability. And I know that there are a lot of things with like cluster autoscaler that make it really difficult to do, but we're committed to figuring out how to do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you're going to have issues even with the native cluster autoscaler configuration and integration to get support for multiple instance types in an ASG.
And the last question I had about the machine pools is, how is that working with multi-AZs? Is it one machine pool, or is it automatically setting up for one machine pool across all, if you're in 3 AZs, to scale it across all of them, or is there a way to target each AZ for EBS volumes and that sort of stuff?
So the way that the code is sitting kind of incomplete right now is, you basically specify subnets, and then that just kind of determines like what AZs you're in. CAPI has the concept of failure domains that have not fully been plumbed through to things like machine deployments, for example. And I don't know how it should work for machine pool yet, per se. There are a lot of kind of strange things that happen in that interaction. For example, if you look in an AZ for subnets, it's going to return the first one every time. That's just the way the code works right now for discovering subnets. And in some environments, we have multiple subnets. So like, how does that work, and how do we improve the logic for looking that up? So anyway, to shorten the answer, right now you provide subnets, and that kind of declares what AZs you're in. But we should have failure domain support, which will allow you to say, hey, here's a machine pool. And by default, it will look at the failure domains available to you in the cluster and deploy your machine pool in that way.
And this comes back to cluster autoscaler integration as well, both through the cluster API provider and also through the native AWS cluster autoscaler. Both of those are limited to kind of one AZ right now for scheduling purposes. They don't have enough kind of knowledge internally to know that it needs to expand a node pool in a particular AZ to support, you know, pods that are pending scheduling versus, you know, just increasing the node pool size right now. All right. Any other questions on that topic? And I can't actually see the participant list still. So if anybody's raising their hand in chat, I'm not able to see that. And then any other topics to bring up before we look into the issue triage? Yep. All right. So actually I have quite a bit of a list today. Let's see, first one, figure out how to package resources for EKS.
It's me.
Yes.
So we just, a couple meetings ago, we were discussing like, hey, we bundled the YAML in Cappy in 3 separate files and then an aggregate file. In Kappa, we haven't had a need to do this yet. Now we might, and that's the issue.
Yep. So I'll go ahead and list this as important soon, just because it'll really be a blocker before we can release anything with the EKS support. What have we targeted the other EKS support stuff as far as milestone right now? Anybody have any idea?
I don't remember.
I thought 0.6.
Let's see. It looks like most of it is
0.5.x. We're going hard.
Although 1534 is next, so we probably need to reconcile the one that says support for EKS.
Oh, yeah.
I think what it comes down to is, do you want this for V1 Alpha 3, or do you want to wait until V1 Alpha 4? Because we probably aren't going to bump the minor version to 0.6 until we align with V1 Alpha 4, whatever that shapes up to be.
Yeah.
Let's say V1 Alpha 3 then. I mean, I can put it to you this way, like in the September timeframe, our clusters will be using this, whether it's released or not.
0.5x makes sense.
All right. Fixed rates condition for resolution of artifact folder. This is around the EDE test. So all right. We should probably do that at some point. All right, let's see. API evolution for VPC and networking topologies.
That one's already got a milestone
It does.
for next.
Oh, okay. I see what I did. All right, create template flavors to support EKS. And support spreading AWS machines across multiple subnets per availability zone. This is going into that machine pool discussion that we had. Or no, this is not.
Machine deployments. So this is the AWS version of the issue that I opened in CAPI that was really just a like asking people if this was something that anybody wanted. Like, I don't have strong feelings that a single machine deployment should necessarily span AZs, but it could if people decided it was worth doing. And I know you had some comments on the CAPI issue, Jason. So this is just the corresponding Kappa one.
All right. So I'm kind of hesitant to assign this to any milestone given it's mostly discussion at this point.
I think next is fine without any real priority unless you wanted to put backlog on it.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right. Let's see. Move away from T2 micro being hard coded for Bastion instance.
Yeah, so if we're going to wait for doing 055 until this gets in, then we should put it in 055.
All right. All right. Audit remove package errors usage in favor of standard lib errors. This came up as Ben was working on fixing some of the lint errors related to the Go 113 error linter. It's not anything that's needs to be done right away. It's more cleanup. So I think important long term makes sense. And I'm just going to go ahead and put it as milestone next because we can always reevaluate importance later. And then specifying subnet ID for an AWS machine in a conflicting failure domain will ignore the failure domain. Yes. So Gab was doing some work and we discovered that right now, if you specify a specific subnet ID on an AWS machine, and there's a failure domain defined on the machine, say for a kubeadm control plane, the subnet ID will actually cause the AWS machine to be created in that subnet ID, regardless of whether or not it actually should be in that specific AZ based on the failure domain configuration. So we should probably error in this case instead.
Would you want this, if possible, to be a validating webhook type of rejection? I know that's difficult given the way that the validating webhooks are set up right now, but is that what you'd expect?
Like longer term, when we don't have the differentiation between the deployment the webhook's running in and the controller, I think it would be nice if we could do it as part of a webhook, but that requires us to fix the multi-tenancy model before we can think about doing that. And I'll just put this in 0.5x for now. We can always reevaluate if we need to bump it to 6.0 depending on priorities. All right, Cloud Init. This was a fun one where it looks like newer versions of Cloud Init are not actually able to use the Bootstrap data that's stored in AWS secrets. So actually, I'll probably put this one critical urgent because it would affect.
Is there an AWS ticket of that
What's
being
that?
a bug? Is there an AWS ticket of that being a bug, or is that?
So it's not necessarily an AWS issue. It looks like it's changed behavior either in Cloud Init or some other configuration on the newer Ubuntu images. Because previously, when we reloaded Cloud Init, the systemd unit file, it would re-pull the sources of information. And with this newer image, whether it's the Cloud Init version or something different on the Ubuntu host, it's no longer doing that anymore. It's reusing the previously pulled kind of source data, and that's where it kind of crept up.
So I take it this means we can't easily build new AMIs that work.
For the Ubuntu ones, yes. I know Robert was looking into trying to downgrade Cloud Init to see if the issue went away, but that doesn't look like it necessarily did it. I started digging into this issue late last week, and I'm planning on digging back into to try to help troubleshooting further over the next couple of days. So hopefully we can come up with a resolution soon, or at least a workaround.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll go ahead and assign this to myself while I'm thinking about it. All right. And then next one is instances should be tagged with their machine name. This is an issue that Ben put up there. He's thinking that if we add a tag to the instance, it might be easier for folks that are trying to match up to specific machines if they're starting from like the AWS instance itself. I don't necessarily see an issue with us doing this, but I do think we need to take care in the fact that we're already doing a lot of things where we're not specifying like a namespace on tags that we're creating for resources, be it cluster or AWS machine today. And we probably shouldn't add new tags that are, not referencing the namespace as well. So just to avoid having to fix one more thing when we try to sort that out. But I'm thinking long term for this, just because I don't know if there's a lot of interest in this yet or not. And then anybody have any input as to a milestone?
I would say if we're not going to do it in the 0.5 series, which long term tends to indicate, then just stick it in next.
All right, sounds good. All right. Encrypted instances fail with very little feedback.
This one is just going to need some investigation.
Yeah. All right. I think I will go ahead and leave this one untriaged for now until we have a chance to dig into this. Did you have somebody in mind for trying to take a look at this a little bit further, Andy, or maybe wait until Nadir gets back?
I mean, we can see if somebody on our team has some spare cycles, but no, I didn't have anybody in mind yet.
All right, sounds good. I'll just leave it, and worst comes to worst, we pick it back up at the next meeting. And then refactor tags package. I think this is coming from some of the EKS work that Richard was doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were both getting a little frustrated with like the kind of auto-generated nature of the API for the AWS stuff means that like the struct for tags in every create is different. So like, I think maybe he's thinking about making that work in a more interfacey way so that you can just apply tags and it will know what to do behind the scenes.
Sounds good. So I'll just go ahead and mark it important soon and for the 05X milestone. All right. And that just leaves the one that we passed over for pull requests. No milestone. Let's see. Fix error handling for Go error 113 linter. I think this one just needs additional eyes for review if anybody has a chance.
Yeah, I can take that.
All right. In that case, anybody have any objections to 055 for that then? All right. Oops. All right. Use filters to select subnet for machines. This is a feature that quite a few people have been asking for, and also just needs another set of eyes. So if anybody has a chance to take a look, I'll go ahead and just put it in 055 because I know it's something that we've been asked for quite a bit. Then clean up ETE, delete old jobs. It's got a hold. I'm not going to worry about that in the new one. Instance type selectable with new
That
defaults.
one's 055.
Yeah. All right. Look up the EKS AMI when appropriate. We're saying 05X for these as well as the bootstrap provider. And then fix error links. That's a pretty old one. So 14 days ago, I think I'll let this go until next meeting. And if we haven't gotten a response yet, we can go ahead and close this one out, I think. All right. Does anybody have any topics, questions, comments, or concerns? Otherwise, we can call it a bit early today.
I did think of one thing. For our case, we expect to use the AWS machine pool with the EKS Bootstrap provider. And in making that decision a while ago, we didn't realize that it won't actually work with the kubeadm provider because the kubeadm provider doesn't refresh tokens. Last week, I took that up with the Azure folks, and I think there's a CAPI issue related to this, but just wanted to call that out that the EKS Bootstrap provider, like it doesn't have any refresh requirements, so it will work right out of the box. But for any machine pool implementation that uses a user data style pattern to work, we'll need that upstream kubeadm change to work with that provider.
I vaguely remember when Juan Lee was first demoing machine pools on Azure, well before any pull requests were open. I think he had either hacked the kubeadm bootstrapper or he did something in the machine pool code or the Azure machine pool code that was refreshing the token, but I guess it never made it in. I don't know.
Yeah, I went into the Azure channel and I was like, hey, I don't know if this works. And the folks in there were like, I think it works. And then a couple of minutes later, oh wait, no, that doesn't work at all. So I think well, we'll see what happens. I think the answer was just, hey, let's detect if this needs refreshing and then refresh it.
I thought that they were flipping the ready state back to unready so that like it would refresh the token. It's a hack around an API, and like that's for sure because CapEK refreshes the token until the machine is booted up. But like get config owner can be either machine or machine pool. And if machine pool is back to not ready, then it would refresh that token or get a new one, I guess, in that case.
I see.
So yeah, there is a trick around that, but I don't know if it got implemented or not. That's something we need to dig.
All right. Any other topics? Questions? All right. If not, see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
See you later.